You're listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast brought to you by Nottinghamshire Live. Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Garibaldi Red, the Nottingham Forest podcast from Nottinghamshire Live. I am Matt Davis, your usual host, with Sarah Clapson.
Hello.
Hello. Eagle-eyed YouTube viewers will notice we're not in our usual studio in Nottingham.
We're in a fancy studio.
We're in a fancy studio. Well, we'll give away a trade secret that the studio in Nottingham is also a store cupboard, but it doesn't look like it because of the magic of technology. This is a real room.
A real room.
Feel,
well, then a pretend room.
Very privileged to be in the Birmingham Live office on a bit of a road trip for one day only. That is because the hidden force of the podcast producer, Dan, is off sick. But not with coronavirus.
I don't know.
I don't know. No, I don't think he has.
It's not been confirmed.
No. But coronavirus is the talk of the week, or certainly of yesterday, unfortunately, when it comes to Forest, with Evangelos Marinakis confirming that he has been, contracted would be the word, I suppose, contracted the virus. So, my phone has got alerts set up, so we'll record this podcast and see what happens, but anything could change even now in the next few minutes. So, Sarah, why don't you kind of just tell us what the latest is as we record this right now?
Yeah, it's a very, very, very fluid situation, I think, at the minute. For the time being, the game against Sheffield Wednesday, nothing's been said about that. At the moment, nothing's been... Other than the fact that Mr. Marinakis has been confirmed to have coronavirus, other details are a little bit sketchy. Can't say for certain whether what kind of measures are being taken or whether any of the players have been tested. That's not something that we can say for definite at the moment. But I mean, it's so difficult to say what's going to happen around it. Mr. Marinakis was obviously at the City Ground on Friday for the game against Millwall. We understand that he met coaching staff, met players. And obviously because he's contracted the virus, then there's that element of doubt about what happens next. Waiting to hear really on that front. Forest and the EFL have both put out statements about it, saying following the latest government health advice. But in terms of the impact that has going forward and the impact on the matches, it's still very much up in the air. Yeah,
I know Olympiacos have said this morning that their players, staff, directors, they've all tested negative for it. You kind of assume that the Forest players will go through the same procedure.
You would have thought so. Yeah, you would have thought so.
And we probably, hopefully get results on that today, and then who knows what happens, I guess, follow guidelines and keep everyone in the picture. Yeah,
I mean, the club and the league are very much in conversation, in discussion. I know the EFL are keeping in contact with Forest because obviously it has a lot of impact. The Arsenal game against Manchester City has been postponed because Mr. Marinakis was at the Emirates Stadium, went on the pitch, understand that he obviously had contact with people there, so they've taken the decision to postpone that Premier League game.
Yeah, that's tomorrow though, so I suppose there's a bit more of you have to make a decision quickly on that one, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't mean the Forest game will be off necessarily.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't at all. Again, because of the time frame involved. But I guess it just shows that it does have a wider impact.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a case to be made for even a wider football now that you postpone games for a couple of weeks. You've got an international break for the Premier League and the Championship. I suppose, like you say, there's a real world impact now, isn't there? Yeah,
I mean, it affects people's lives. It's not just sport. It's the impact that it has on people. It's obviously, it's a disease that people can contract, and you have to take into the consideration the wider implications for that. Sporting events across Europe have taken a hit, and there have been measures put in place for that. Obviously, in the UK at the minute, there isn't anything, but that doesn't mean to say that further down the line or things can change, that there will be that impact.
If the game does go ahead, let's talk as if it is for a moment, then even the best case scenario is it's been a chaotic week for the club, and it's going to impact the training and preparation for Sheffield Wednesday on Saturday, isn't it?
You'd have thought so, yeah. I mean, as much as Savril Amucci and the players will try to put it to one side and put it out of their minds, I'm sure that it has had an impact because of obviously Mr. Marinakis being at the stadium and coming into contact with the club, with members of the club. it's very difficult then to kind of switch your focus to a football game. It is difficult. If it does go ahead, then obviously they'll be professional about it and they'll do what they have to do. And I'm sure they're putting measures and plans in place for whatever happens. But yeah, at the end of the day, they're human beings, and you'll be thinking about other things. I'm sure if they do, when they cross that white line, they have to put that to one side and focus on the job in hand, but it can't be easy.
And if it doesn't go ahead, then, well, you don't know what's going to happen, do you? But I suppose it does impact Forest's push for the playoffs. If we kind of put the health thing aside, then it could have a footballing impact still if they have to miss a game or two or three.
Yeah, it's so difficult, isn't it, to speculate or to think about what might happen, because at the minute anything could. It is really, really difficult. Hopefully it can all, if it's safe and everything is okay, it can go ahead as planned and we can carry on with the season and Forest can continue with their promotion push. But it's so difficult, the situation at the minute, and it just keeps changing minute by minute, let alone day to day. So I'm sure the authorities and Forest and the club and the league and they all have it in hand and they're all taking everything into consideration, and we just kind of have to put our faith in them at the moment. Let's
look back on that Millwall game. I think last week we predicted Forest. Well, I didn't obviously they draw, but I'm miserable. But then you said they'd win, and they lost, and they lost badly. They were, they were terrible on that occasion, weren't they?
Yeah.
Really, in the first half.
They were really bad. You kind of thought hoped that they'd got that poor performance out the way at Middlesbrough, but it was just a bad week. It was another bad display against Millwall. They kind of started okay. They had a few bright opening minutes and they had a couple of good openings, but Millwall just caught them out and scored 3 quick goals, and that was it. It was pretty much game over after that. Forest never really recovered, didn't really get going, didn't really create a lot. They're a bit all over the place at the back, which is unusual for them because generally they're pretty solid and pretty tight, but they would just a lapse in concentration. I think Millwall got the better of them up front. They didn't look their usual kind of selves, and the kind of players that have usually stood up and put in good performances, your likes of Joe Worrell and Tobias Figueiredo and Matty Cash, they just had off days, and it happens, especially in the Championship. This league has been so up and down this year. Forest are by no means the only ones to suffer from that kind of inconsistency. It seems to be happening all the time, from top to bottom, really.
I think the thing with Forest is that when they're good, they're very good, and when they're bad, they're terrible. And they haven't lost many games, but when they do lose, they tend to just get either blown out of the water or just play as they did against Charlton. It seems to be a peculiar thing about this Forest team. Yeah,
I think it must be so frustrating for the manager. I think you'd rather lose having played well and lose by maybe an unlucky goal or lose knowing that you've kind of given it a good go, but they didn't really do that on Friday. And most of the time they do have that kind of fighting spirit about them. They do dig in, they are pretty, they can grind out a result, they are pretty gritty, but they weren't on Friday, and I say it is unusual, it is a bit out of character for them, but they can either be really good or really bad, and you know that on their day, if they play well, they can beat anybody. I'm sure they'd fancied their chances against most teams in that division. They can pick up really good results because they've shown that they can play good football, but when they have an off day, they really have an off day.
Is there a weakness against big strikers? Because Gestede, who's already got a really good record against Forest, but he roughed them up at Middlesbrough. Smith obviously scored that hat-trick. Is that something to be concerned about, that the rare old-fashioned target man does rough them up a bit?
Yeah, I don't know. It does seem that way when you look at it, but you look at Tobias Figueiredo and Joe Worrell at centre-half. And
it's their thing, isn't it? It should be the kind of striker they like playing.
Exactly. They're good old-fashioned centre-halves. They love heading the ball. They love getting crosses out the way and making big blocks and big clearances. And in theory, that should be the kind of striker that they're pretty good at coming up against. I don't know whether it's just a bit of a quirk in the results, or I mean, looking at the game on Friday, they did struggle with the way that Millwall played up front. It's difficult to say, really, because generally they've been so solid, those two. They've been a really good partnership. That back four and Reece Samba and Ben Watson in front of them, they've been really the backbone of that Forest team.
we kind of discussed the selection going into the game, and Lamucci pretty much went with what we lobbied for in terms of starting Carvalho. It's not his fault if they can see 3 goals, is it? I mean, what did you make of Carvalho's performance?
I thought he did all right in a difficult kind of situation when he's not really been playing. I thought he looked okay. He had a few bright moments. He certainly wasn't at fault for them losing 3-0. Forest just as a whole never really created a lot. I think out of the forward players, he probably had one of the better games. He did at least try, and he did try to make an impact. It was just really tough going. I think we kind of mentioned it last time, but he's the kind of player that needs a run of games, I think, to find his feet a little bit and get back to how he knows he can play. When you're just thrust straight in like that for a game when you've not been playing regularly, it must be really difficult to kind of turn your form back on all of a sudden, because you've not got that base to build on, all that kind of grounding behind you. Yeah. It's tough for him, really. I
suppose the midfield's still the big concern, because Semedo played the deeper role and he didn't have a particularly great game. Ryan Yates was left out, and then Bostock's probably the one that's come in and he's done all right, and he feels like the next cab off the rank at the moment if they do play it Wednesday on Saturday.
Yeah, I think, he certainly made a case for himself to start against Sheffield Wednesday, because he came on and he did make a difference. And as he did in the previous game, he's looked pretty good in both times that he's come on. He's quite composed, calm on the ball. He gives them that little bit of steel in midfield, which they were lacking. I think you can kind of see the difference that Sam Basal makes when he's there, because as much as Lamucci might say, well, we've got players to step in and we don't want to make excuses, I think you can see that he's been a really big miss for them. He just brings so much in the centre of the park. But I think for me, John Bostock would be a decent replacement against Sheffield Wednesday. I think he's done all right. It's just whether that fitness is there, I guess, because he's someone that's not played a lot. He's come on as a sub both times. Can he play 90 minutes? I don't know. It's difficult to say. You'd hope so. You'd hope he's kind of got that base level of fitness and that sharpness. But when you've not played a lot all season, it's going to be difficult to go straight into a championship game and play the whole 90 minutes.
What's happening with Sang?
I think it's very much a kind of day-to-day, game-by-game thing, I think, with his knee. Forest were hoping that he'd be back soon, but it's something that you don't want to take a risk with. You don't want to put him in and he suffers a setback and then he misses more games, because you're coming to that time of the season now where you really want him there if you can for a run, because he makes such a difference. You don't kind of want to take any risks with it. There's no point gambling when you've still got 9 games left and he can come back later and play a key role. I'm sure they'd hope that he'd be back for Sheffield Wednesday, but or after that, if or not, it doesn't go ahead. But yeah, it's a really tricky one. It's just kind of trying to manage it and get it right, I think, with him.
Obviously, I read all your pieces.
Of course.
Of course. There was one about Graben's knee. What's happening with him? Is he still capable of playing the 90 minutes week in, week out? Yeah,
he pretty much said himself that, yes, he's got this little knee niggle, but it's not a serious enough injury at the moment to keep him out. I think there's a few of them, and you'd be hard pushed to find in most championship squads that there isn't a few that are carrying knocks and niggles at this time of the season. But he's desperate to play. I think that unless they're, same with Sammy Amiobi and probably Joe Lolly as well, who are both had little knocks and niggles, they want to play. They want to play in these big games because they know that it's coming to that time when it's crunch time, isn't it? It's when it all counts and players want to be involved. Lewis Graben said that it doesn't at the minute affect him too much, and while that's the case, he wants to play, which is great because he's such an important player for them.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? I suppose if you look at West Brom, they've got Sahor, Robson, Kanu, Austin. Leeds have got Bamford, Augustin, and whoever else. Brentford have got a few other. They've got 4 or 5 options. Forest kind of pin their hopes at the moment on Graben with Tyler Walker, not as an unknown quantity, but you wouldn't necessarily want to throw him in for 10 games in a row to start, would you? It's such an emphasis on Graben.
Yeah, it's not just for his goals either. It's for his whole round game. It's for the importance that he is so central to that squad. He works so hard. He's good at both on and off the ball. If you look at his goals record's fantastic. I know he had that little spell where he hasn't scored. But just his all-round work rate and his contribution is just phenomenal. It really is. And it's difficult for someone like Tyler Walker, perhaps, who's not got that level of experience and is a different kind of player. As much as he will try and fill that role, trying to do it to the level that Lewis Graben does is really difficult, really difficult. It just shows how key Lewis Graben is.
The one silver lining coming out of the weekend was the fact that no one actually seems to want to finish sixth, which is quite good. Fulham and Bristol City drawing, Preston losing, Derby coming up on the rails a bit. I can't see them getting in, but you never know. It's a funny old league, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that is kind of a bit of a cushion for Forest. They've got that 5 points as it stands.
Yeah, there is that bit of breathing space. I think you don't want to take anything for granted, and you don't want to say by any means that it's done and dusted and that top six space is sewn up. Yeah. But they are looking in a good position. That gap to seventh is that little bit of cushion. Top two, I think, it's looking really difficult now to catch them, but because of the swing involved more than anything. I mean, you look at it and think, is it 10 points, I think, to second? Yeah,
and it's West Brom a second now. Leeds,
exactly.
To be fair to Leeds, I mean, they were well beaten by Forest, but they recovered when everyone thought they might bottle it. So I think they're probably gone, aren't they, really, now?
Yeah, I think so. You're relying on them to lose quite a few games and other teams to win, other Forest to win a few games. And as much as you'd bank on Forest winning a few, I don't know whether you'd think West Brom and Leeds would lose enough to close that gap. It is difficult. I mean, you've got to keep going. You've got to keep trying right until the end, or until it's mathematically impossible. But it is looking a big ask. But top six, I think, for Forest is looking a decent proposition.
Well, Andy Hinchcliffe was on another podcast basically saying it's nailed on. I'm not sure. You need another 14 points still, I would say. I mean, he's talking about shifting mentality and, playing as if you're already in a playoff campaign. I don't think you can do that, can you?
I don't think so. No, because then you're at risk of a bit of complacency, I would have thought. If you think, we're definitely in the playoffs, we can sit back now and think about May. It's only March. You've still got 9 games to play yet. You've still got to make sure that you've made that top 6 spot secure. And you've also, it's that winning mentality, isn't it? What's served Forest well so far is this game by game. We're not thinking further than next week or next Saturday. And I don't think you can stop doing that now, because that's how you kind of keep yourself grounded and focus on the next game, focus on the next opposition, and you've just got to keep doing that and see where it takes you. I think if you start thinking, we're definitely top 6 now, then you're in danger of slipping up, and nobody wants that.
Let's talk about Saturday as if it is happening. Sheffield Wednesday are in a dire run of form, and their manager's coming out and hammering his own players, but Forest are absolutely hopeless against Sheffield Wednesday for a long time, and not least the last time they played them as well. Do we have to bring up that last game? Was that worse than Millwall? That was the worst one, wasn't it? Wednesday at home,
I think that was a pretty bad one, definitely. Forest are good on the road, though. Away games do tend to suit them better. It always makes you a bit nervous, I think, when you're coming up against a team that isn't doing very well, because you think, it's going to turn around at some point. You just got to hope that it's not Saturday. But Forest having last week out their system, hopefully, you'd expect them to play a lot better and put in a better performance, because they'll be disappointed as anybody with what happened last week. I know they managed to get a point, obviously, at Middlesbrough, but with what happened on Friday night at the City Ground, they'll want to make up for that. They'll want to bounce back, and you want to get points back on the board. Away from home, generally they've been pretty good. Hopefully, fingers crossed, if it does go ahead, they'll be back to normal.
Yeah. What if it goes ahead behind closed doors? That'd be a bit weird, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know if we'd be allowed in. Well, you're not going. I don't know if I'd be allowed in,
I don't know. It would be a very bizarre situation. because the crowd do make a difference, home and away. I mean, Forest away fans this year in particular have been fantastic. They have at the City Ground as well, but they get such a strong away following and they make so much noise. Even at West Brom the other week, all you could hear was the Forest fans. And that translates onto the pitch. The players pick up on that. And I'm sure they've all mentioned it. Lamucci's mentioned it, the difference that having the crowd behind you can make. So to play in front of an empty stadium, that would be very different, very weird.
How do we see Wednesday's form then? Because they've been absolutely horrendous. Does that what impact does that have on a game?
I don't know. When you're on a bad run of form, it is difficult to get out of it. But I always hate these games because you're kind of thinking it's going to turn around at some point, or something's got to happen to kind of make a change, and you just don't want it to be against Forest. When you're playing against a team that's on that kind of run, I mean, their confidence is obviously going to be low, you would have thought. Forest have just got to focus on themselves, just concentrate on themselves, play their game. Like I say, on their day, against anybody, when they play to their potential, they're good enough to beat anyone. If they can do that, then they've just got to go there and do what they know they can do. Just do it better than they did on Friday.
Is there a case of bringing Dawson back? I know Figueiredo and Worrell have been such a good pairing, but maybe after a defeat like that and then 2 goals against Middlesbrough, would you make the case or not?
I wouldn't.
No.
I'd stick with that back 4 because they have been so good. I mean, you could argue that you could bring in Michael Dawson also because of the kind of presence that he has and the fact that he's so experienced at this stage of the season. Whether or not the pressure is starting to tell a little bit, he's the kind of person that will just bounce off him. He's so experienced, he's been there and done that. He'll know how to handle these kind of situations. And as much as he'll do that in the dressing room as well, if he was on the pitch, then obviously he would play that role. I'd stick with the same back 4, I think. Would you?
Oh, yeah, I think I would. Figueiredo hasn't really done anything particularly wrong. I mean, he was the better defender against Middlesbrough, to be fair to him. So actually, probably ironically, Worrell that's probably had more of a dip. So I'd probably, stick with that. And I wouldn't change formation and play 3 at the back or anything like that. I know that's quite fashionable at the moment.
There's people arguing for 2 up front as well. But
I think I'd shake up the midfield and try and give them more protection. I think Semedo... he's a bit inconsistent, isn't he? He started off really well. He got injured, and then since he's come back, if he'd started his Forest career like he's playing now, then Forest fans wouldn't be, they wouldn't think much of him. He'd kind of be in a Diakabi bracket in a way at the moment. It just shows what form means and confidence means. So I think I'd bring Bostock in. I'd stick with Carvalho. And I'd probably only make that one change, even though they were so bad against Millwall, I think I'd stick with that personally.
Yeah, I think so. If you change too much, then you're in danger of ripping up everything that's done well so far, I think.
Yeah. That
formation has worked well for the most part. So I think you're at risk of panicking a little bit if you think, we've lost this one game, we've not performed well for 2 games, let's rip it all up and see what we can do.
When he does make big changes, then it tends to go wrong anyway, the Charlton game and things like that. A tweak here and there is more, especially with Forest, they remind me of the team that made the playoffs more under Hart than Davis, because they have this kind of 14 or 15 player core group, and then beyond that, the players that come in don't always perform because they just haven't played as much as anything. So they've hit this formula that they probably need to stick with now and see if it takes them to the end of the season.
Yeah.
Although that said, I do wonder about whether Brennan Johnson and Alex Mighton might come in. Johnson scored twice in the 23s on Monday and Mighton scored again. And maybe whether you get those around the squad more. Johnson hasn't played since the FA Cup game at Chelsea.
Yeah, Alex Mighton's been in and around it a little bit, but not really got out on the pitch very much. I'd give one of them a chance, but it's so difficult. You forget how young they are sometimes because they are really good and they're so highly rated. But this kind of pressure situation, when there's so much at stake, you've got to... As a manager, you've got to make sure that your players are right and that they can handle all that. And to throw young players in, I'm not saying it's a risk or a gamble, but...
No. I think I'd have them in the squad, though. I'd have them on the bench,
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, I'd certainly give them a run out here and there if the game allows it.
Which one's further along, do you think, Johnson or Mighton in terms of their development? Is it Johnson?
I don't know. I mean, Alex Mighton's been the one that's been more involved in the squads generally.
Yeah.
I mean, they're both really highly rated, really talented players that have got really bright futures ahead of them. I know Sabrina Michi said several times that he's very impressed with them, a big fan, and it's just a case of blooding them in. You don't want to go all in, throw them in at the deep end and risk hampering their development, risk it going the other way. You just got to try and get it right with young players. It's really difficult, difficult thing to do as a manager.
We did have a listener question about training and whether the players should be given time off, but I suppose that's a bit irrelevant this week given what's happened. I suppose it's probably been a chaotic week, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it probably has. I mean, they did have a bit of time off after Friday night's game. I mean, as for what's happened in and around training this week, I think it would all be... It's difficult to say, isn't it? Difficult to say what they've been able to do. Is
he a manager who drags them in? Well, it would be Saturday morning and Sunday morning. Does he get them in, or does he take a bit of time and...
Yeah, I mean, he said he was going to give them a bit of time off, give them a few days and then get them back in this week. But whether those plans have had to change.
No, he's not a ranter and a raver, though, is he? In your experience?
No. I mean, he's pretty calm, pretty composed, whether they win or lose. Very rarely. There's only been a few times where he's, after certain results, where he's been really angry and really frustrated, and that does show. But I mean, he still keeps very calm and very level-headed. He's very much, if they win, he stays on an even keel. If they lose, he stays on an even keel, and that kind of translates to the squad. I think they're all pretty composed, pretty calm, and that's what you need really at this stage of the season.
No. Do they have anyone who gives us a bit of the hair dry treatment? Would that be Dawson or something like that?
I'm pretty sure Sabrina Mucci could do it in the dressing room when he's all behind closed doors and they've not played like he wants them to. I'm sure he's got a sharp tongue when he wants. But yeah, they've got players like Michael Dawson, like Ben Watson. I mean, even Joe Worrell, he's never been afraid of saying what he thinks to his teammates. They've got a few players like that. Lewis Grabban's fairly experienced. A few big voices, I think, in the dressing room, and they'll all know after Friday that they didn't perform like they should or that they want to. You don't necessarily need somebody to stand in front of you and rant and rave and say you were rubbish to know that they'll all be well aware that it wasn't good enough.
What's your prediction for Saturday, assuming it were to go ahead then?
I think Forest will win because they are better on the road.
Do we have to say Forest will win every game?
Sorry.
I think we've been here every week.
Okay, all right, sorry.
You can't say.
I don't want to say they're going to lose.
No.
No, I genuinely do think they'll win on Saturday. You can say they'll lose if you like.
I think they'll lose. I don't know.
They'll be covered from all angles.
Oh, they're terrible against Sheffield Wednesday. But they did win at Cardiff. They're equally bad against Cardiff.
Yeah, exactly.
And they won at Cardiff. And they're so up and down that
Well, they've been pretty down for the last week, so
I know.
I figure it's going to go.
Are you not worried yet, are we? Are they not worried it's all going wrong?
No,
I don't think so.
No, I think it's so reactionary football, isn't it? You have one bad game and all of a sudden that's it. But it was just a bad week. It was just 2 games. Before that, they'd done well at Cardiff. They've played well in other games. Every team's going to have blips, aren't they? It's just how quickly you come through it and how you turn it around. I don't think there's any need to panic. I really don't.
No.
If it continues, if they don't play well against Sheffield Wednesday, then maybe you start to ask a few questions. But
and you don't want to be the team that limps into the playoffs either if you do get in there as well.
No, exactly. You want to be going in good form, don't you? You want to be going on a winning streak if you can, but there's still 9 games yet. I know 9 games isn't a lot, but it's still a fairly long stretch of time. A lot can happen, a lot can change. It's all about finding form at the right time, isn't it? Going into the playoffs.
I've drunk all my tea and I'm starting to lose my voice a bit. I don't have coronavirus, but I do have a bit of a sniffle. So it's dust related. It's all the building work at my house that Sarah knows all about.
Oh, okay.
I know. We did travel over here together.
Yeah,
so,
we did.
Yeah, isolation. Right. So thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. We don't know where. Yeah, we hope we'll be back next week. Who knows what's going to happen? I do have a special guest lined up, but it'll probably fall through with everything that's happening. And we've had a few special guests lined up that have fallen through.
Yeah.
So I will be here. I will have a haircut by next week, and I'll wear a shirt that's ironed for anyone that's watching this. Dug out of the washing.
That would be a first.
I don't know. I wear iron shirts if someone irons it for me.
You usually wear a jumper.
I do wear a jumper, and I realise I've worn the same jumper for all 5 episodes of
Have
this.
you?
I think so, or I might have got 2.
Is it a lucky jumper?
No, well, they were rubbish against Millwall. I've got 2 jumpers that look very similar, and I might have worn that. So I've donned a shirt for this, so to try and look like I do have
shirt and tie next week.
I can't wear a tie. I think I've put too much weight on my neck. It's got a bit fat. That's why I wear jeans to work. I don't know if people see this. I've stopped wearing trousers to work because none of my trousers fit me, and I'm not buying any more. And I did I'm going to go off on a tangent. I did go on a diet and I lost half a stone, but then I put it back on because we don't have a kitchen at home and we've not had a kitchen in like 6 weeks. So I've been living off microwave food and salad, but more microwave food than salad or takeaways. So now I weigh more than I did before I started the diet after Christmas. And I'm not eating any crisps or any chocolate. I've been, eating fairly well. Although no. We had Chinese chips and McDonald's in the space of 7 days last week. So it's all gone to hell.
I'm not sure what I can say to that.
I don't know, tell me to get back on the wagon or something. I don't know. We're getting a kitchen next week.
There you go.
Well, we're not getting worktops for the kitchen. Oh. We're getting one worktop. So, yeah, we might have a cooker. So I might look a bit leaner and I might even shave. I don't know, shave. So, yes, hopefully back in Nottingham. Yeah, probably with Sarah, hopefully definitely with me, maybe with a special guest, maybe with some football to talk about. We just don't know. We're a bit sorry, it's been a bit of a hodgepodge episode.
It has, yeah.
But we'll try and keep everyone in the picture and hopefully this isn't all out of date by the time everyone can listen to it.
Hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please let us know. We love hearing your feedback. We'll be back soon with another episode. Thanks for listening.